Start by opening your books up. Stand whenever you are ready. Turning to your presidents, we're going to sing Our President is Just the Last Name for the students that are new today. Let's begin. Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, Adams, Jackson, Buren, Harrison, Tyler, Polk, Taylor, Fillmore, Pierce, Buchanan, Lincoln, Johnson, Grant, Hayes, Garfield, Arthur, Cleveland, Harrison, Cleveland, McKinley, Roosevelt, Taft, Wilson, Harding, Coolidge, Harding, Roosevelt, Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, Ford, Carter, Reagan, Bush, Clinton, Bush, Obama, and Trump. Very nice. You may be seated. Today we're going to be reviewing a couple of new different countries. We're going to start out with Bulgaria. Bulgaria is a small country that is close to Romania and it is in the Middle East, right beside the Black Sea. We can see right here. And we also have the capital of it is Sofia. So what is the capital of Sofia, Angela?
Bulgaria.
I apologize. What is the capital of Bulgaria?
Sofia.
Very nice. And we can take a look right here. It is a very small country in the European region, and it's very small. If we zoom in right here, it's very small compared to a lot of other countries, and this is the large country that we are going to be learning a lot about today. So keep your ears open as we begin to learn about that. We also have Hungary. Class, say Hungary. Hungary. And our capital of Hungary is Budapest. Class, say Budapest. Budapest. And we have the Danube River running through Budapest all throughout. And a couple of surrounding countries are Slovakia, Romania, Ukraine, and Serbia. So what is the capital of Hungary, class? Budapest. Great job. And Hungary is right here. It is right beside our country that we just learned about, which was Ukraine. What was the capital of Ukraine, class? Sofia. Great job. Our other one that we are going to be learning about is Poland. Poland is a country that we're going to be learning a lot about, and you've already learned a lot about as well in previous grades. And there are a couple different things. It has the Oder River and the Vistula River as well. And it's right underneath of the Baltic Sea. You can see here that the Baltic Sea is right there. And then it is also very close to Russia. And you will see that there's a very important things to do with that as well. And you can also see that right here, there's a bit of land and water completely surrounding it. It's not a completely landlocked state like most of our landlocked country. There are not states over in Europe. They are countries. We also have Romania, which is Bucharest is the capital. Class A, Bucharest. Bucharest. Great job. For today, those are the only ones that we are going to be learning about. But we have quite a few different things. Have you ever had something that was taken away from you? Maybe you got in trouble and you are grounded from your parents. Maybe they told you that you can't play on your phone anymore, or you can't play your Xbox, or maybe you're grounded from going to your friend's house. You had a freedom taken away from you. Well, today we're going to be learning about a country who had lots of freedoms taken away from them through something called communism. Communism is not something that is very good. It's honestly quite scary. They come in. Could you imagine people coming in, taking your stuff, saying that your house was not your house, it was their house. Your chairs were not your chairs, they were your chairs. Your books were their books. Everybody was supposed to be treated as equals, but sooner or later, we will recognize that that was not the case at all. One of the countries that is well known for communism is Russia. And communism started to take place in Russia in the early 1900s with a place called the Soviet Union. That is something that is almost a synonym to communism. When you hear the Soviet Union, you should think of communism as well. And the Soviet Union began to spread the belief of communism throughout different countries. So it started in mainly one country, but then it spread and it spread and it spread. It's quite similar to how the gospel was, how it spread through different areas by being told and taught. But the thing was is that it was not necessarily accepted. It was forced upon people. God has given us free will. He's given us the opportunity to be able to believe in him, to have a relationship with him, and to love him. Communism doesn't give you that option. It tells you what you need to do. It forces you into the things that it wants you to do. And it's honestly quite sad. Well, Russia was first discovered by a Viking way back in the AD. So this was a little bit just after Christ had come. And it was discovered by a Viking named Rus. Class, say Rus with me. Rus. And Rus was the Viking that led all of the different communists, or not the different communists, the different settlers into Russia. And if you notice in Russia, we have Rus in Russia because it is the country of Rus. It was named after its founder. And then we also have somebody that is very important. His name is Vladimir the Saint. Class, say Vladimir the Saint. Vladimir the Saint. And he formed a different type of Christianity called Eastern Orthodoxy. Class, say Eastern Orthodoxy. Eastern Orthodoxy. And he brought a form of Christianity into Russia. And this is a great thing. But this was in AD 988. So this is a very, very long time ago. There was also a place called Kiev. Class, say Kiev. Kiev. It was back then the capital, the religious and political hub center. So it was the main place, the most important place in Russia at the time. But we also had in 1240 the Mongols came, and they decided that they wanted Russia. They wanted to overtake. So they came in and they overtook all of Russia and controlled it for nearly 250 years. That's almost a whole entire quarter of a millennium. That's more than 2 centuries they controlled it. They were very powerful, and they decided that they didn't like where Kiev was. They didn't want it to be the capital anymore. So they moved the capital over to Moscow. Class, say Moscow. Moscow. Moscow became the new political and religious center of Russia and began to be the capital as well. There were a lot of different people for the Mongolian troops and the people that led them. They were led by somebody that was named Ivan III. Class, say Ivan III. Ivan III. And he was the first true national leader of Russia. So maybe they had people who were kind of in charge, but not quite. Ivan III was the first person to ever be in charge of Russia. Now we have Ivan III, but then we also have an Ivan IV. And Ivan IV was known for something else. His name was known for Ivan the Terrible. He was known as Ivan the Terrible because he was such a terrible person. Surely somebody who was great wouldn't be called terrible. He was terrible for the things that he did to his people. He was a czar or an emperor. Class, let's say czar. Czar. And czar is just another word for emperor or king. So he was the king of Russia, basically, or kind of like how we have our president. So Ivan IV was a terrible person. He did monstrous things to people. He did not care about them. He did not love his people. He just wanted, and he thought of himself. I hope that each and every one of you don't act like Ivan the Terrible. I hope that people can say that you are James the Great, or maybe Angela the Magnificent. Hopefully they're saying good things about you. You don't leave behind a reputation of terrible things like Ivan IV did. He passed laws that made it to where there were serfs. Now maybe you're thinking of serfs on the water. It's not that. It's more of like a peasant. It was saying that there were people that were lower class. And we have people here who maybe make less money, but they're all valued the same. Their thoughts and opinions are all worth the same within our government. However, that was not the case. These serfs lived on a land that was owned by a lord. And they worked for the Lord, and not the Lord, but a Lord. They worked for them, and the Lord provided them a place to stay, provided them for food, and they didn't really get paid, but they provided for them. So they had clothes, they had food. For the most part, they were treated okay. But the serfs had no freedom. They didn't own anything that they had. Nothing that they had was theirs. They never owned a single thing. Could you imagine that? Not owning your own house, or not owning the clothes that are on your back. People gave them to you, but in return for your work. It was a form of payment, but it was very hard to go from a serf to a lord. It was nearly impossible, and as far as I know, it didn't happen very often. It was difficult. It was worse than being a necessarily poor person in America, because you never had the opportunity to own anything. You were constantly working for what you had. There were lords and there were manors, and they began to fade away. Russia was kind of behind. I know back in Indiana, there are a lot of fashion trends and different things that we start to like and we really, really enjoy. But things in New York are quite different than the things that are in Indiana right now. They're very, very different. We're going to continue reading and learn more about some different czars that are known for their great and wonderful things that they did. We're going to begin reading on page 267, and I will start us out. Eastern Europe. The largest country in Eastern Europe is Russia, the world's largest nation. Only a portion of Russia lies in Eastern Europe, however, and the rest of the nation extends across Northern Asia. Communism is a system of government that says there is no God and allows people no freedom. It first took control of an entire nation when it took root in Russia in the early 1900s. As the communists invaded Eastern European nations, communism began to spread. The empire that the communists built in Eastern Europe was called the Soviet Union. Later, communism also spread to many other parts of the world. Communism ruled over the people of Eastern Europe for over 70 years, taking away their homes, businesses, churches, freedoms. The people became so poor and so weary of communism that they rose up against it. Many of the countries of Eastern Europe are now struggling to become free and strong. Find the European countries on the map. As you read about them in this chapter, notice the size of Russia to the European hemisphere map. So as we look here, we've been taking note of a lot of the different countries, and if you look right here, you can see how small these little countries are. All these tan countries are different parts of Europe, and then how large the Soviet Union is. Russia is, in fact, the largest country in the European continent. What is the largest country in the European continent, Angela?
Russia.
Very nice. And now we can compare, or more like contrast, God and communism. What is besides the fact that they take God out of everything, what does communism do that goes completely against God?
They force you to do things. You don't have any free will.
Yes, you don't have any free will. And we know from the very beginning that we've always had free will. And that's how sin entered the world. But God still gave us that. He still gave us the opportunity to love Him and to know Him. Please continue reading for us on Russia under the Tsars, Angela, on page 267.
Like most Europeans, the Russian people are descendants of Noah's son, Japheth. During the 9th century, a Viking tribe known as the Rus invaded the area that is now European Russia. The area became known to the land of the Rus or Russia after the Viking tribe. In AD 988, Vladimir the Saint introduced the Russians to a form of Christianity called Eastern Orthodoxy. The city of Kiev became the political and religious center of Russia.
Okay, let's just take a second here. We said that Vladimir the Saint introduced Christianity. Now, I want to go back and explain a little bit. The Vikings were very rough and ragged people. They were known for their violence. So was it a good thing that Vladimir the Saint introduced Christianity to Russia?
Yeah.
Yes, it was. And why was it a good thing? What did it give them the opportunity to do?
Learn about God.
Yes, and we know, because the Bible tells us and God tells us, that if a man is yearning for God, that He will send someone. Now, we don't really know, but I kind of wonder, who was the person that was yearning for God, that wanted to know God and have a relationship with Him? God answered that person's yearning for him and provided a way for him to learn about him and to have a relationship with him through Vladimir the Saint. And I'm sure a lot of other people also were given that opportunity as well. About 1240, the Mongols conquered Russia and controlled it for nearly 250 years. During this time, the religious center of Russia moved from Kiev to Moscow. The Prince of Moscow began to use the Russian church as a tool to gain more and more power. In 1380, a Russian army defeated Mongolian troops. By 1480, Ivan III, Prince of Moscow, became the first true national leader of a united Russia. So we often hear United States of America. Well, this was United Russia. So it was a very large landmass that was supposedly united by Ivan III. We're not really told if Ivan III was great or if he was terrible. Oftentimes when very memorable people are labeled, we'll later see that there's somebody named Peter the Great because he was great, Catherine the Great because he was great, and we've already heard a little bit about Ivan the Terrible because he was terrible. So maybe he wasn't really all that great, but he wasn't really terrible either, so they just left him as Ivan III. Continue reading for us, Angela.
The first Caesar, Ivan IV, took the title of Caesar, which means...
Not Caesar. Czar. There we go.
Known as Ivan the Terrible, this Czar passed laws tying the peasant farmers to the land. This created a new class of people in Russia, serfs, who were little more than slaves. Thus, when Western Europe was moving out of the Middle Ages and the system of serfs, lords, and manors was fading away, Russia was just beginning to follow the same system. Some later famous czars were Peter the Great, Catherine the Great, and Alexander the First.
Okay, let's take a look at this. We have a photo of Ivan the Terrible. What do you think he looks like a nice man? Do you think he looks approachable? Would you like to be around him, Angela? No, I don't think I would be too. What about Catherine the Great? What does she look like?
Nice.
Yeah, she looks nice. She looks like she might be a little bit more friendly than Ivan the Terrible. He does, in fact, look quite scary. I don't know if maybe it was just because the person who painted it was scared of him, so he portrayed him in a scary way, or if he really did look like that. I'm sure he probably did. Painters back then were very accurate in the way that they did their paintings. And then we also have Tsar Nicholas the First, and we're going to learn a little bit more about him. And Tsar Nicholas the First was someone who was very important. He expanded Russia. At first, we were a very small country, and then we expanded, and we got a little bigger, and we got a little bigger, and a little bigger. Well, Tsar Nicholas I did the same thing. He wanted his country to grow. He wanted them to prosper. So he really worked on growing the country. Although he worked on growing the country, there were some things that he did that maybe weren't so great. Anyone who said anything against him, could you imagine if I heard you say something about me, and maybe it was like, I don't really understand that. You weren't even being rude. You were just saying, I don't understand what just happened. I am confused. I'm lost in this lesson. And you came to me and you asked me, and I said, well, you're just going to get an F because you questioned what I was doing. That's what he was kind of doing. He was said, you're questioning what I'm doing? Well, off with your head. You're not going to question how I rule my country. And he'd often kill people, or he would hush them up in different ways. He had a secret police force that would go through, and they controlled the press. So the newspapers, they weren't allowed to say bad things about their king or their czar. Oftentimes we see a lot of people nowadays speak harshly against Trump. You know, he is just human. We are not perfect. That our perfection was ruined at that very first sin. So all of us are sinners. Trump is a human, so just like us, he's a sinner. He's going to make mistakes. He's not perfect. And you see all of these newspapers criticizing him. Well, you also don't see Trump saying, off with their head. I don't want them in my country anymore. They can go. They can leave. They can be vanquished. They're not allowed in America anymore. We don't see him do that. Maybe he does a couple of little crazy things here and there. But overall, he's a very level-headed person. He was put in authority by God. so we should respect him. But we oftentimes see a lot of people not doing that. That's what these people were doing. But instead of him being mature about it and him just living with it and that criticism, he would get rid of them. He would kick them out of Russia, or he would have them killed. That's not something that is very kind or great. And in extension to that, he also had the Crimean War that began. And this war, class, let's say Crimean War. Crimean War.
Crimean War.
And this war was against 4 different countries: England, France, Turkey, and Sardinia. And this was against Russia. So all of these countries were going against Russia, and they were trying to get it to where Russia could not expand anymore. But Tsar Nicholas I kept pushing and pushing and pushing. And we will continue to learn about this as well. Many of the czars wanted to make Russia into a huge empire by expanding Russian territory in all directions. Around 1637, the Russians moved into Siberia. Between 1805 and 1812, Russia started colonies in the New World, Alaska and Northern California. During the reign of Tsar Nicholas I, Russia added many countries to its empires. Nicholas crushed a revolt of the Russian people against the government and also crushed efforts by Eastern European countries to break away from Russia's empire. The power of the central government kept growing stronger. The Russian secret police were organized at this time to control the press, the universities, and every part of Russian life. Continue reading for us, Angela.
From 1854 to 1856, Russia fought and lost the Crimean War against England, France, Turkey, and Sardinia. From 1850 to 1900, the Russian Empire continued to expand further into Eastern Europe and into Central and East Asia.
Thank you. Okay, so oftentimes if you have a great and powerful country, you're going to have people who are going to come in and take stuff from you. You have people who say negative things about Trump, how they want him out of office, how they're going to try to run against him in the next election. And that's okay for our country. But back then, when you were a king or a czar or an emperor, you had to be pushed off of your throne. And we had a lot of people who were fighting back and forth for the different lands and territories. Things were not established the way that they have been so recently in these next years. So we have Napoleon. He's a very short man. So sometimes he was not taken serious, but he was a fierce fighter. He fought, and he was more of the ruler of France. And he came into Russia and he said, I want Russia. I am going to take this land. I want it. Well, he went in there. He brought 600,000 troops. But the problem was, they're in France. They have moderate weather, kind of maybe a little bit warmer on some days and colder on others. Maybe kind of like the Midwest of America. They experienced all seasons. So when it got cold, it was cold, but it wasn't Russian cold. They were not expecting the chilling and bitterness of the cold that Russia would bring. So whenever all of his troops came, many of them died, not only in war, but because they were prepared for the bitter, harsh weather. We're going to continue learning about this. In 1812, the French Emperor Napoleon marched into Russia with an army of 600,000 men. He occupied Moscow, but loyal Russians burned the city, leaving the French soldiers with no food. Discouraged, Napoleon ordered his army to withdraw. French soldiers, not used to the bitterly cold Russian winters, died by the thousands from hunger and cold. Continue reading for us, Angela.
I'm missing a page here.
That's quite okay. There are a couple things we can look as she's finding her spot. We can see right here. This is, let's zoom in. We have France is over a little bit on the side, but Napoleon was expanding throughout. So France is, here's Italy. France would be just a little bit this way and above. So then they're going into Russia, which is up towards the North Pole a whole lot more. So that's why it gets so cold. And they were not expecting that cold weather. Now, we also know that we have our serfs. And our serfs were eventually given freedom by Alexander II. The only thing is that when the serfs were released from their lords, they didn't own anything. How were they supposed to be free? So instead, The government took everything. They said, okay, let's give the land, let's do this, let's do that. And they rented it out to the who used to be the serfs. So were they actually really free? What do you think, Angela? No. What they were doing is they had to work for the government. They had to work for different things for their payments so that they could live in their house. So basically, they went from having their lords and different lords throughout the country to mainly just serving the czar. Well, Angela, continue reading for us.
Serfs' freedom in 1861, Alexander II set the serfs free. Because the serfs had no place to go, the government bought land and gave it to them. The serfs had to pay the government back for the land. Actually, the serfs were still serfs, but their master was now the czar. The last czar in 1881, Alexander II was assassinated. Alexander III was determined to crush whoever dared speak out against the government. Alexander III's son, Nicholas II, wanted to preserve the past. Nicholas II, the last czar, attempted some reforms to help the people, but political unrest and spiritual darkness brought terror and revelation to the land.
Okay, so who was the last czar of Russia, Angela?
Nicholas II.
Yes, and who was his father? Who was his father that was determined to crush anyone who spoke against Russia and the government?
Alexander III?
Yes, and let's make careful note of this, as sometimes it goes back and forth between the names. It's not always going to be, so first it was Alexander the First, then Nicholas the First, Alexander the Second, Alexander the Third, and then back to Nicholas the Second. Now, up to this point, communism was not in the country. They did have some form of freedom, although maybe it's not the freedom that we have here in today with the wonderful government that we have in America that allows us to have all of these different things that we get to use. But the idea of communism was forming. A man named Karl Marx began to think of communism, and he kind of thought of it as, it's not really fair that the rich are rich and the poor are poor. And so he wanted to take things from the rich people and give it to the poor. And in a sense, it does sound nice, but think of it this way. Let's say, Angela, you got an A on a test, but your friend Jeremy over here, he got a D. Did you work hard for your A on your test? Yeah, you worked hard on it. Well, I'm going to say, no, Angela, you don't get to keep your A. We're going to drop you down to a C, and we're going, maybe a B minus, but more like a C. And we're going to bump up Jeremy's grade to a C too. Would you be mad at that, or would you be like, oh, okay, that sounds good to me?
I would be mad.
Why would you be mad?
Because I worked hard for what I...
Exactly, you worked hard for what you had. So that's the same idea of communism. The people who are rich, oftentimes they did work to become that way. Back then in this day, it was a little bit more complicated because the rich were oftentimes born rich and the poor were born poor, and it was hard to get out of it. But there were different ways to get out of that, innovations. One thing that I love personally is capitalism, because you're able to invest and to think of different things. So you have an idea and you can invest in that, create something, and make money off of it. Now, we're going to learn, he was exposed to Christianity, but he didn't like Christianity. He didn't like the free enterprise system. The free enterprise system is something that says that you can create a product and you can sell it. So Taco Bell can go and make their tacos and sell it to whoever they want to sell it to. They can own what they want to own. They own their business. They own their tacos until they sell them over. That's also capitalism as well. They go hand in hand. But he didn't like the idea of that. He didn't like the idea of freedom and people being able to just do what they wanted, or to be able to invest and work hard for the things that they did. I kind of think that it was a form of laziness that maybe was in his mind. Maybe he didn't want to go up and get up to work to get the rich and to get the money and to get the things that he needed. He just wanted to be given it. So maybe he felt like, well, maybe Johnny over here feels the same way. So I'll just give him what Alexander has. And then he'll be fine. And Alexander can just cry a river and build a bridge and get over it. That was kind of his idea behind it. Now, is that a good idea to have? God tells us to work hard. With everything that we do, we are supposed to give our best. So if we're giving our best, we should trust the Lord to provide for the rest. We shouldn't have to worry about whether or not the government is going to be giving what needs to be given to us. So we're going to continue about how communism began. While events were building over the breaking point in Russia, the idea of Marxism or communism took hold. Karl Marx, a German Jew who had been exposed to Christianity but rejected it, wanted the working class to control the government, and he wanted Christianity and the upper classes to be abolished. Marx was opposed to the free enterprise system or capitalism. Capitalism is the American way of running businesses and handling money that has helped make our United States such a great world leader. He did not believe that people should be allowed to own factories and businesses. Continue reading for us, Angela.
All property should be taken away from the people and put in the hands of the government. That way, Marx thought no one would make any more money than anyone else, and everyone would be equal. If your father owned a gas station or a clothing store, you would want someone to take it away from him and give it to the government. To make Karl Marx's idea work in a country, a leader would have to use cruel tactics against those people who resisted having their possessions stolen from them. This is what happens in Russia and later in many other countries of the world where communists took over. Countries that follow Karl Marx's idea were called communist countries.
What are the countries called that follow, or whose ideas are communism? Who created communism?
Karl Marx.
And whenever we have a country that follows his philosophy and a way of thinking, what is he called?
Communist.
Yes. What is the largest nation in the world? It's also the largest nation in the Eastern Europe called.
Russia?
Yes. And what was the communist empire in Eastern Europe called? Let's think about it. It was at the very beginning of our reading. We said that communism could be a synonym to this. It started with an S.
The Soviet Union.
Great job. Who became the first real leader of Russia? Angela?
Mongolia?
Not quite. That was a land that...
Ivan III.
Yes, Ivan III. Very nice. What is a czar, and who was the first czar of Russia?
The first czar of Russia was Peter the Great.
Not quite.
No, Ivan the Terrible.
Yes, Ivan
And
the
a czar is a king.
Or an emperor. Very nice. What French emperor tried to unsuccessfully defeat Russia? Remember, I said that he was a very short man that was not taken very seriously.
Tsar Nicholas.
Not quite. Remember, that was a czar, so he was the emperor of Russia.
Napoleon.
Very nice. Whom did Alexander II set free?
The serfs.
Great job. And were they really free?
No.
Why were they not really free? Who were they serving instead? They went from serving their lords to
the czar.
Fantastic. And what idea of government and economics did Karl Marx begin?
Communism.
Great job. You may close your books and we will continue learning about this tomorrow.